The story recorded in Genesis 41 takes place after years of silence, waiting, and apparent injustice in Joseph's life. To understand the power of this moment, it is important to remember where he is when it all begins, in an Egyptian prison, not because he committed a crime, but because he remained faithful. He had been sold by his own brothers, taken to a foreign land, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and thrown into prison. Yet even there, he continued to demonstrate something rare: trust in God. Now imagine this scene. While Joseph spends his days in that dark place, far from home and with no idea when he might be released, the most powerful man in Egypt, Pharaoh, begins to have disturbing dreams. The text says that one night Pharaoh dreamed he was standing by the Nile River. Suddenly, 7 healthy and beautiful cows came up out of the river and began grazing peacefully. But then 7 other cows came out of the river, and they were very different. They were thin, ugly, almost frightening. And something strange happened. Those thin cows devoured the healthy ones. Pharaoh wakes up, troubled, but he falls asleep again. Then another dream comes. Now he sees 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 thin heads of grain appear, scorched by the desert wind. And once again, something strange happens. The thin heads swallow the good ones. When Pharaoh wakes up this time, the text tells us something interesting. His spirit was troubled. He knew those dreams meant something. But what? So he does what any powerful king of that time would do. He calls for all the magicians, wise men, and advisors of Egypt, men trained to interpret signs, symbols, and omens. And yet, none of them can explain the dreams. Imagine the silence in that palace. The wisest men in the nation with no answers. That is when someone remembers Joseph, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, who had once been imprisoned, suddenly remembers something that happened in prison. He says to Pharaoh, "Today I remember my faults." He explains that while he was imprisoned, he had a dream, and a young Hebrew interpreted that dream with accuracy. Everything happened exactly as he said it would. Suddenly, Joseph's name surfaces again, after years of being forgotten, after years of waiting. And here a deep question arises. How many times does something seem forgotten, when in reality, it is simply waiting for the right moment? Pharaoh immediately sends for Joseph, and the text tells us an interesting detail. Joseph is taken out of prison. He shaves and changes his clothes before appearing before the king. This shows how serious that moment was. He was not standing before just anyone. He was standing before the ruler of the most powerful empire in that region. Pharaoh then speaks directly to him. "I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph's answer reveals a great deal about who he had become after everything he had gone through. He does not say, "Yes, I can." Instead, he says something far deeper. "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." This statement reveals humility. It reveals faith. And it reveals something even more important. Joseph does not use this moment to promote himself. He acknowledges where true wisdom comes from. Then Pharaoh tells the dreams. The fat cows, the thin cows, the full heads of grain, the scorched ones. And Joseph begins to explain. He says something surprising. The 2 dreams are actually one single message. God was showing Pharaoh something that was about to happen. The 7 healthy cows represent 7 years of great abundance throughout the land of Egypt. Rich harvests, full storehouses, prosperity. But after those years would come 7 years of severe famine. A famine so intense that people would completely forget the years of abundance. It is interesting to notice that Joseph does not only interpret the dream, he also presents a solution. He suggests that Pharaoh appoint a wise man and place administrators over the land to collect part of the harvest during the years of abundance. That way, when the famine arrived, there would be food stored. Now think about that for a moment. Joseph had just come out of prison. He could have simply interpreted the dream and remained silent. But he did not. He thinks about the future of the nation. He thinks about solutions. He thinks about saving lives. And that leads us to another reflection. When we face difficult moments in life, do they make us bitter or do they make us wiser? Prison could have hardened Joseph's heart. It could have destroyed his hope. But it seems the opposite happened. The experience prepared him. The text says the idea pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And then Pharaoh himself asks an impressive question. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? That question changes everything, because now Pharaoh looks at Joseph, not as a prisoner, but as someone extraordinary. And then comes one of the most remarkable turning points in the Bible. Pharaoh says to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders." In other words, Joseph leaves prison in the morning, and on that very same day, he becomes the second most powerful man in Egypt. Only Pharaoh himself would have greater authority than him. Pharaoh then removes his signet ring, a symbol of authority, and places it on Joseph's hand. He dresses him in fine linen garments and puts a gold chain around his neck. Then he has him ride in his second chariot, while people proclaim before him, "Bow the knee." It is a radical transformation, from slave to governor, from prisoner to the leader of a nation. And this leads us to a powerful question. How often do we judge our story too early? Joseph could have believed that his life was ruined when he was sold by his brothers. He could have thought everything was over when he was falsely accused. He could have lost hope while sitting in prison. But when we look at this moment, we realize something remarkable. Every stage of his life had been preparing the way for something greater. His experience as a slave taught him administration. Potiphar's house taught him responsibility. Prison taught him patience and discernment. And now, all of that would be necessary to manage a crisis that would affect not only Egypt, but many other nations as well. The text goes on to say that Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving Pharaoh. He traveled throughout the land of Egypt, organizing the storage of food during the 7 years of abundance. The result was astonishing. Grain was gathered in such enormous quantities that the text says it became like the sand of the sea, beyond measure. And then the years passed. The 7 years of plenty came to an end, and the famine began. Exactly as God had revealed, the famine spread across the entire region. But in Egypt there was food. The people began to cry out to Pharaoh for bread, and he answered them, "Go to Joseph. Do whatever he tells you." It is a short sentence, but filled with meaning. The man who had once been rejected by his brothers was now responsible for feeding entire nations. And here lies a profound lesson. Sometimes what seems like the end of our story is only the beginning of something we cannot yet see. Joseph went through betrayal, injustice, abandonment, and years of waiting. But every moment had a purpose. And perhaps the most important question this story leaves us with is this. When we face difficult times, can we still believe that our story is still being written? Because Joseph's life reminds us of something powerful. The hardest chapters of a story are often the ones that prepare the most extraordinary moments. And perhaps that is why this narrative has inspired people for thousands of years. It shows us that faithfulness, patience, and trust can transform prisons into palaces, and seemingly confusing dreams into plans that save lives.
If this story spoke to your heart, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel and follow every chapter of the Bible told as powerful, easy to understand stories. Leave a like, share with someone who needs to hear this message, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in the next chapter.